The French actor Gerard Depardieu was questioned by the police earlier on today in connection with the alleged sexual assaults of two women. Well, it's understood he's now been released without charge, although he's due to stand trial in October. Well, these alleged assaults happened during filming, one in 2014, the other in 2021. The 75-year-old actor has denied any wrongdoing. And just last year, Depardieu said, "I have never, ever abused a woman." Well, following on from the Me Too movement, the hashtag Balance ton porc, or expose your pig, started trending here in France. France 24's Monty Francis tells us a bit more about that.
I think that we are in a critical moment.
It was back in 2006 when the American activist Tarana Burke first used the words Me Too to encourage survivors of sexual violence to come forward with their stories. It would take almost a decade for the hashtag to go viral. Sparked by the case against the powerful Hollywood producer Harvey Weinstein, in 2017, victims started coming forward to share their accounts of sexual assault, leading to the downfall of several powerful men in Hollywood and beyond. In France, using the hashtag Balance ton porc, or expose your pig, tens of thousands of women flooded social media with their accounts of rape and harassment. They were met almost immediately with resistance. A public letter signed in 2018 by 100 notable women, including the French actress Catherine Deneuve, denounced the campaign, saying it was fueled by a hatred of men.
Rape is a crime, but trying to seduce someone, even persistently or clumsily, is not. Nor is being gentlemanly a macho attack.
The public response to the letter polarized opinion in France, as did claims of sexual misconduct against the celebrated actor Gerard Depardieu. President Emmanuel Macron even came to the actor's defense, saying he was the subject of a manhunt and deserved the presumption of innocence. In spite of the backlash, there are signs that attitudes in France may be shifting. Earlier this year, actress Judith Godrèche, who claimed she was abused by two directors as a teenager, became the first to testify to the French Parliament about sexual violence and abuse in the French film industry.
And I was carrying the guilt of my childhood. The reason women don't talk for 30 years is not because they talk when it's time to be on the cover of magazine or there's something. When they don't talk for 30 years, it's because they're ashamed.
In 2021, Godrèche and others formed an association of actresses to push for changes on French movie sets, including the presence of so-called intimacy coordinators, who are trained to help actors and film crews navigate sex scenes.
Well, for more analysis, I'm joined by Monty Francis from our news desk. Monty, you filed that report, and it ended with Judith Godrèche there, with some pretty unique perspectives, because she's French. She spent the last 10 years in the United States as well, so she knows kind of both sides of the Atlantic, the Balance ton porc environment and the Me Too movement as well.
Tom, she really does have a unique perspective on this. She has worked on movie sets in France and in the U.S. She also claims to have been sexually harassed by Harvey Weinstein when she was just 26 years old. Back in February, she was here in Paris, as I mentioned in the piece, testifying before the French Parliament. And after that hearing, she was asked by reporters about the differences in the reactions to the Me Too movement in the U.S. and in France. And here's what she had to say.
I'm not, idealizing the United States, but I definitely felt that when women, and I was one of them, spoke against Harvey Weinstein, everyone, step by step was there to try to make a change and sort of like not, they didn't try to shut them down. He did, but it didn't work. In this country, I feel that it's not just the men who are the abuser who are trying to shut down the women, it's the society, which for me is bizarre.
And during that interview, Godrèche also made the point that in France, there's often a separation in people's minds between the artist and their art, which really makes a difference in the French way of viewing things.
Okay, do you think that's perhaps why people who are persona non grata in the United States have decided that they'll set up shop here, and they seem to rather like being here in France.
That could be the case, and two names spring immediately to mind, Tom: Roman Polanski and Woody Allen. In the case of Roman Polanski, he is French and Polish, but was living in Los Angeles in 1977 when he pleaded guilty to the statutory rape of a 13-year-old girl. Famously, on the eve of his sentencing hearing, he fled the U.S., and he's been a wanted fugitive ever since. Despite that, he's enjoyed a lot of success as a filmmaker, even to this day, but everyone is not supportive of him. In 2020, Polanski won the César for Best Director for his film An Officer and a Spy. And famously, the actress Adele Haenel made a big scene, walked out of the ceremony in protest. This win also really angered feminist groups who were calling for a boycott. It led the 21-member board that oversees the Césars to resign en masse. Now, as for Woody Allen, his last deal to make a film in the U.S. ended in 2018 when Amazon cut ties with him. He has since made and released films here in France. In fact, his last film was a romantic thriller filmed in French, and it debuted last year at the Venice Film Festival. So while he's essentially a persona non grata in the U.S., he really has found financing and success here in France. One thing to leave you with here, Tom: in the U.S., the New York Times has been keeping track of this, and they estimate that at least 200 powerful men, both in Hollywood and in corporate America, have been taken down in one form or another by the Me Too movement, whether that means a conviction or losing their job. That is not the case here in France, but Judith Godrèche and others are hoping that that might change.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for that. Monty Francis from our news desk. Thank you. Well, we can speak now to Mary Harrod, who's an associate professor in French and Screen Studies at the University of Warwick in the UK. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. Just looking back over the decades, have abuse and sexual assault in the French cinema perhaps been rife and swept under the carpet?
I think it seems that way. Godrèche has been prominent in talking about the industry acting as a kind of cover for practices which are endemic in French society, and the structure of the industry allowing that in various ways. You mentioned the fact that cinema has the status of art form in France. Subsidies, and that does lend weight to the idea that everything is fair game in the service of creating this higher artwork, and it creates a kind of solipsistic idea of the director, perhaps also of star actors like Depardieu, who has actually kind of worked with directors and had an authorial role in a lot of the films he's been in.
Yeah, it seems like, just looking at it from the outside, it's very much a man's world, the world of French cinema. Well, at least it has been until pretty recently. It doesn't look like it's changing at all.
Yeah, there are some really encouraging signs of change. You've talked about, NL in 2020 standing up against Polanski at the César, but, he was still winning awards there. Now we've got Judith Godrèche given a platform at the same awards. Or if you look at Cannes, a while ago they pledged to have 50-50 parity by 2020, which would be in terms of kind of juries and awards for the genders, and they didn't achieve that by 2020. But actually, this will be the first year that there will be more women than men on the jury. It was close last year. And if you look at the awards over the history of the Palme d'Or, there were 2 women until 2 years ago, and now in the last 4 years, now there are 3 women basically. So it's gone up kind of exponentially. So those are really encouraging signs of change, as well as associations like the one you mentioned, supporting intimacy coordinators. But I would say that you kind of take 2 steps forward and 1 step back, because talking about Cannes, nonetheless, this year the film that opened the film festival was a film by Maïwenn Lebesco called Jeanne du Barry, about the famous courtesan. And that film is very much kind of championing a culture of seduction, sex for its own sake on a higher plane. And also, who do they cast in that film as the King of France? Johnny Depp, straight off the back of the controversies with Amber Heard, which is a very interesting statement. So your previous speaker was thinking about, sort of surrogate French people, France harbouring people who may be in bad odour elsewhere. And I think this is another example.
Obviously, we have to assume Gerard Depardieu is innocent until proven guilty. His trial, we understand, is going to happen in October. Do you anticipate over then the next 5-6 months this garnering a huge amount of media attention, and therefore that media attention shaping and really influencing discussion and the narrative here in France on this, what it seems, historic issue?
I mean, I think one would hope so. Yeah, I think it's going to kind of pick up the momentum that has been gathering. Talking about, two steps forward and one step back, Macron was very recently defending Depardieu, so it is a case that, overspills beyond merely the industry. And I think that's because Depardieu is a star who's had a stature without compare, really, in French cinema. And not only that, but he's really been seen to represent Frenchness at home and abroad in particular ways, and a kind of Frenchness that is a little bit uncomfortable in the current context, that's uncompromising, that's highly virile, that's a kind of man of the flesh, a bon viveur. I think it's also very fascinating to think about the fact that he was propelled to megawatt stardom really by a role in the 1970s in a film called Les Valseuses, which is a kind of a slang way of saying testicles for English-speaking viewers. And in it, he plays a hoodlum who is a kind of pavement harasser and sort of low-level sexual abuser, actually. So he's a method actor. I think it points out the way that there are correspondences between art and life. These things don't exist in a vacuum. And I think, Godresch and others are absolutely right that it's part of a much wider culture. And hopefully it's going to reflect back on a much wider culture as well by being such a kind of momentous figure, probably, being toppled or a critical mass anyway is
absolutely
building up.
Sorry to cut you short. We've only got about 50 seconds left, but I just wanted to ask you. I mean, you touched on an interesting point just there, and we sort of saw it in our report as well. People have come to the defence of Depardieu and gone against the whole balance ton port, which, just to remind our viewers, is the French equivalent of Me Too. I mean, what does that say about the difference, perhaps, between French attitudes and US attitudes to this very uncomfortable issue?
Yeah, it's really hard because I think what anti-Americanism is actually an aspect of what happened after Me Too and of some of this resistance, a kind of resistance to American political correctness. As I say, this kind of desire to be uncompromising, wedded to a kind of liberty. But it's a liberty that really supports male freedom. So somebody being free is usually at somebody else's expense. I mean, another aspect to it is perhaps the fact that historically in the political sphere and in sort of the public sphere in general, people's bedroom activities were seen to be outside of the spotlight in a way that hasn't been true in Anglophone nations. And I think that went right up until Sarkozy, who was a president who modeled himself on a more kind of American celebrity culture, and he changed things. But before that, there was things like Mitterrand having a secret love child, and it was kind of an open secret, but the press didn't go there, and that was seen as something kind of seedy that other nations' press did. So absolutely, there are kind of complex other factors coming into play, and I think that anti-Americanism is rife in older generations more than it is in the younger ones.
OK, well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. We're out of time. Mary Harrod, Associate Professor in French and Screen Studies at the University of Warwick. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Let's get a check now.